un nouveau film va commencer. Quelle va être la première scène?
Well, you know, I really, sometimes I had a dream, and in the dream came something that was the beginning of a film. But usually, I try to think of what the theme of the film will be, and usually it's a simple theme you can state in 1 or 2 words. With the movie The Conversation, it was privacy. With the movie The Godfather, it was succession. With the movie Apocalypse Now, it was morality. So usually there is a theme which will inform everything else. And so when I have other questions like how should it begin, or what kind of costume should the actor wear, or any question, most of those questions I know instinctively because I just feel it should open this way, or it should. Those questions. When I don't know the answer, and don't forget, a movie director is asked 1,000 questions a day. What should she wear? Should her hair be long or short? Should the shoes be high heel shoes or sneakers? Well, usually you just know the answer, but when I don't know, then I say, well, what is the theme? And when I think about the theme, usually it provides the answer. Like in The Conversation, when they asked me, well, should he wear a coat like a detective? And they showed me all these coats. There was one plastic that was transparent. And I said, the theme is privacy, so it should be that coat. So your theme helps you on the way to all the details. And I began really as I would call it, I was interested in science. I was very good with science. I wanted to really be a nuclear physicist, but I had flunked algebra twice in a row, so my father said I could never be a physicist. I think I would have been a good physicist, but nonetheless, but I could make anything with electricity. I could make a motor out of a tin can, or I could make a radio. And so I went to many schools, and I went to a school every year for a while before college, and so I would just go to the theater department because that's where the girls were. And I would offer to help with the lights, and that's how I became interested in theater. And then I did 4 years in one college as a theater student, which was a wonderful beginning for me. But one afternoon, I saw a screening at 4 o'clock that nobody was going to see. It was October, 10 Days That Shook the World. And I saw this, it was silent, it was without music. And I couldn't believe my eyes, because although it was silent, just through the editing, you could hear everything. And after that, I came out. I was going to go to the Yale Drama School for a graduate, and I said, I'm going to be in cinema like Eisenstein. And so I went to the UCLA Film School. I was very poor. I lived on really so little money, you can't believe it. But eventually, I was able to get a job working for Roger Corman as a very low assistant, and that job was my first experience really with cinema, where I would, Roger Corman is a very economical film director, but I was able to be on the set of the Vincent Price movies like Tower of London and the many films, and actually help as a dialogue director. I would coach the actors, but I learned the low, inexpensive way to make films, how to do it for no money at all, because he was very thrifty, Roger Corman, and it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for me to learn coming from theater, to learn cinema, but really a sort of do-it-yourself guerrilla theater. And that has always helped me, what I learned at Roger. But Roger Corman is still very vital. He's at 92 years old, and he's still very active and person. But yes, I learned everything about how to make movies for no money from Roger Corman. Apocalypse Now was a production nightmare, and it was so over my head. You know, a lot of times when you're trying to convince someone to finance a movie, you try to appear as though you know how to do it. But most of the time you don't know how to do it. And Apocalypse Now, I said, oh, it's going to be big production with helicopters, and it's going to be, you know, big war film on a level of the Guns of Navarone or something. But when I got there, I realized I didn't know how to do it, and it was all learn as you go, which is, I guess, my enthusiasm got ahead of my knowledge, which happens often. So I'm sure that Roger thought I was crazy. You know, to attempt such a thing, because this is, of course, before the days of, thankfully, of digital effects. Everything in Apocalypse Now was real. If we were up in a helicopter and it was shot and a bomb went off, we were really in the helicopter and the bomb really did go off.
C'est-à-dire le nombre d'hélicoptères qu'il y a dans le ciel, c'était le nombre d'hélicoptères réels qu'il avait. Aujourd'hui, sans doute, le metteur en scène dirait, je veux un peu plus de, il dirait à son CGI guy, je voudrais un peu plus d'hélico, c'est pas assez bien. Et là, tout ce qu'on voit, et on revient au cinéma lumière, c'est la même chose. C'est-à-dire, ce qu'on voit, on peut avoir confiance dans ce qu'on voit. Il n'y a pas de trucage, il n'y a pas de...
Well, in a way, since the San Francisco filmmakers, who myself, George Lucas, Carol Ballard, many of people there, Philip Kaufman, in many ways we originated sort of what is contemporary movie sound, but also the advent into digital alternatives of film editing. And the reason that is because we were very poor, we had no money. So we knew that in a movie, the sound was told as much of the experience, told half of the experience to the picture, but sound was much cheaper than picture. So we emphasized on those early productions sound and ultimately the contemporary Dolby standards. Dolby was a San Francisco company, took what we did on films in those days under the great artist Walter Murch, who did much of the, so we provided what is contemporary movie sound, but also the decision to become digital was largely influenced, was this boy scientist believed that one day a digital medium which would be much freer, and George Lucas's very practical idea that since his Star Wars movies required digital effects, meaning why shoot on film, and I know this is controversial, why shoot on film when it was going to have to all be expensively converted to digital? So George said, we'll just shoot it in digital in the first place. And that was the very sort of big decision that ultimately that led to this revolution where now not only was sound digital, sound was first, then editing became digital, but the last was projection being the digital, and that completed the conversion. So in a funny way, this little band of very poor filmmakers who didn't have any money behind us at all was the reason for so many things that we now live with in contemporary cinema. Starting with, of course, the attention to sound that films get today, and then ultimately even this transfer into digital technology.
Je crois que je peux affirmer que les...
Ask the question. Don't give me, because you know the question, as I understand it, is concerning the relationship of the producer to the director, and the possible, he mentions that Bob Evans, who was the producer of The Godfather and arguably the first Godfather, was certainly the film that put me on the map. However, Bob Evans had zero to do with the second Godfather, because that was my condition of making a second Godfather. But, you know, a person like Bob Evans is not a person without talent. He definitely had ideas, and the essence of him had much talent that even I, who don't forget, I was very young, I had no power, I was totally under domination by that, which is why I didn't want it on the second film. But giving him his due, it's very much like if you're building a house, there is the architect and there is the contractor, say, of the building. So the contractor is concerned with hiring the people and making sure that what the architect wants to do can be done for the money and the resources that you have. And the architect is the visionary, as it were, who sees the beauty of it and doesn't want to be told that he can't have glass here or he can't have brick or stone here. So the relationship between the producer, who has to coordinate all the resources from the financier and figure out how to keep or serve the artistic purposes of the architect, is very much what the relationship of producer and director is. And good can come out of it. Good comes out of conflict very often. Good comes out of being forced that you can't do something. Very often the creative person will think of something that's cheaper, that's better. So in answer to your question is, yes, of course, the different personalities that you have. Film is a collaboration. It's not made by one person, it's made by many people who all come together and work on it together. So there is value in a producer's input, but you know, that's also why most directors, as soon as they get some status, insist that they are their own producer. But also all architects, when they are important enough, they'll specify that they choose the contractor, and usually it's the contractor that they know they're in harmony with. And even who not only writes the screenplay, but writes the story and originates the work before that. I have done much of the writing area, and I know that when you adapt something from a novel or a play or another piece of literature, the one who wrote that first piece of literature did the hard part. That's why if you look at my movies, if I didn't write an original story, the author's name is always above the title. It says Mario Puzo's The Godfather. It doesn't say Francis Coppola's The Godfather. I wrote the screenplay, but the hard part, I think, is the original writer. So even in many auteurs, some write from scratch the whole thing, some adapted from a book, and some work with an army of co-writers. This is a big thing, and I can name their names. There's an army, there's Orange and Post, and there are many, but they do a lot of it as well. You can say, well, I wrote it, but I wrote it with even the great Federico Fellini had some wonderful writers with him. So the subject of writing is really, for those of you who are interested in one day making cinema, you have to think about writing because you have to learn what you can, and we can talk about that now in great detail, especially in France, where some of the great writers and really changed the novel right here. Flaubert and the guy who wrote Manon Lescaut, Abbe Provost, and many tremendous contributions to the form of the novel and also to the play, Racine and Corneille and what have you. So we are on the shoulders of giants when we talk about writing. Goethe and Schiller and Shakespeare, although Tolstoy doesn't think Shakespeare is so great, surprisingly. So then if we talk about acting, it's the same thing. We could spend the other half of our time just talking about acting. What does it really mean for a director to work? I hear, oh, the director got that performance out of that actor. That never really happens. The actor does the acting. The director helps the actor, sets the climate so that he can be unafraid because it's terrifying to be an actor. It's like if you're going to play a cello, you have the audience, the cello, and you. The actor doesn't have any instrument because the actor is the instrument. That is a terrifying situation. So how do you best help the actor, make the conditions comfortable so he or she is, the actor, is unafraid, is able to, and they're different. Some want you to stay there and be involved and sort of coach them like a basketball coach. Others want you to just look and give them a reaction of how they're doing. I can talk about how they're different. Some want to do 50 takes and some want to do 2 takes. And what do you do when you have those 2 together? So we can talk about acting a lot, but I make the point, it's the actor who does it. It's the actor who brings the flesh and blood to the character. The director doesn't do it, doesn't pull it out. The director just makes the conditions helpful as best you can for the actor. So those are the 2 really giant subjects, I think, of any discussion on the cinema.
Bien sûr.
Parlant de John Ford et d'Henry Hathaway, d'abord, ils avaient le talent de nous choisir, et ensuite, ils savaient créer un espace confortable pour qu'on puisse bouger.
Très important. Une autre question super et directe. Jeune homme, attends, non, je vais vous donner mon micro. Voilà.
Bonjour Monsieur Coppola. Alors j'aurais une question. Vous avez beaucoup de confrères réalisateurs et vous avez réalisé des chefs-d'œuvre, sans parler du Parrain et d'Apocalypse Now. Et ma question est la suivante. Si vous devriez réaliser un film que vos confrères ont fait, ce serait lequel et pourquoi?
Non? C'est quoi, je sais pas compris.
He's
Le film qu'il aurait aimé.
asking me that if I had the opportunity to make a film that has been made already by one of my colleagues, but it's, you know, I have so little time and there's so much I wish to do that I would not spend my time. You know, I don't even want to make a film like one I've made. If you look at my career, I started out with a gangster picture that was known. I could have had a whole career doing gangster pictures, but then I made something as different as a gangster picture as I could, and then I made the Vietnamese war film in style and totally different. Then I made a sort of magic realism musical, and then I made a Dracula film in all entirely false scenery, all inside. So I was going from project to project with different styles, different intentions. Why? Because I wanted to learn what I was good at. Because one day when I was old, I thought, well then now I'll know what I can do best. But every film I made was an experiment to teach me about that style, and that's why my films are so. You could take one movie and put it to the next. It's not even the same person made it, perhaps. But I did that deliberately because I wanted to learn by not just doing a bunch of gangster pictures, which I was being encouraged. When I made Apocalypse Now, I was very successful. I had made 2 or 3 enormously successful movies. I had won awards, but nobody wanted me to make Apocalypse Now, and nobody would. And if I own Apocalypse Now today, it's only because nobody wanted it.
Le temps est si compté.
Bonsoir Monsieur Coppola. Est-ce que ça vous est déjà arrivé de rentrer sur un décor ou une scène et de ne pas savoir où placer la caméra? Et si jamais ça vous est déjà arrivé, est-ce que vous avez un conseil à donner aux étudiants que nous sommes?
Well, I have had moments of terror many times when I first come on the set. in terms of where to put the camera, you ask yourself, you know, what do I want the audience to see? So that usually is a good start, and you put the camera, which will give you a view that you think that the audience wants to see. But interestingly, that decision, which is a decision possibly of point of view, from whose point of view are you showing the scene? Are you showing it from a particular character? Are you showing it for some objective audience? Those decisions were the first decisions that began to change the modern novel, because if you go back to what is the first novel, you could say, I don't know, you could say Don Quixote, which is a certain kind of what we call picaresque novel. But in terms of the contemporary novel, maybe it was Goethe's Elective Affinities, which was a short dramatic novel. And after, in the early, you know, the development of the novel, let's just talk about that for a second, kept changing. And one of the first changes began to be the introduction of point of view. In Tolstoy, in maybe Anna Karenina, the first chapter is from the point of view of one character, and then the second chapter is from the point of view of another character. So changing the point of view of how you were writing it, telling it from the prince or whoever, of Anna, or I'm thinking in the early innovation of when the novel began to change, that was the first element. How do you handle the point of view, which is the same thing with the film director. Is like, whose point of view do you want the scene to be seen, or the whole movie do you want to be seen from some objective like theater audience, or do you want it to be this person seeing that? So some of these changes that happened in literature also are very relevant in directing a movie, and whose point of view are you going to show, and how do you do it? So I think very, very much the decision of where do I put the camera is similar if you were writing the screenplay, is whose point of view am I seeing the scene from? And then it goes on from there, and it becomes more complex, whether or not you're going to honor a point of view, or it's going to change. Also, a second consideration is in the novel is the manipulation of time. Is time going to flow pretty much in as we experience it, or is it going to take leaps? So both all of the work of the director and the actors and the writers do come upon the same decisions that you make when you decide how you're going to tell your story. I'm interested in doing what I'm thinking about now, and I know there's the aspect of cinema where you can, a business aspect, and how can you earn money and all that. I'm not so interested in that. I'm interested in learning by working on a theme that I think ultimately would give me the greatest reward in understanding more about it. So, I mean, could I do it in a series? Usually the series has an economical thing it's aiming. They don't say, oh, do a series on anything you want to do. They say, do a series on this or that. And they have this terrible algorithm to say what they will be successful. As those of you who are young, I want to warn you on the subject of wealth gathering. Wealth gathering, you have to understand something about wealth gathering or riches gathering. Things that create that sense of riches also is what creates poverty and misery. Because when you create riches, you're creating some abstract thing that you have that other people are so desperate that they'll work for you to get it. So you don't go for riches without contributing to poverty and misery. There's another kind of wealth gathering that's considered just, where you actually produce a benefit to the society and you deserve to have some privileges. But traditional, like as I hear in businesses, everyone now wants a business, wants to be rich. It's that if they stopped wanting to be rich and instead wanted to be learned or have good friendship and stuff, the world would be a nicer place. So I am becoming more cynical about people who want to go into young people especially, because they think that's a path that they can have a certain kind of success. To me, I believe very sincerely that everyone here is 1,000,000 to 1 shot, that the fact that your mother and your father came together on that moment and you produced someone so unique that if you make art, that's not personal, it's a sin. That to make art because you get hired to do it, and of course then if you're hired, I was hired to do The Godfather, I tried to do something that was personal even though I was hired. So it's not that you're getting hired that's bad, but just to think of it in terms of some sort of industry success. I think I would like to see all of you here who are going to make films to make really personal films. And that's what I've told my family, what I told my kids, and I think they do. To make a film that demonstrates how unique you are is the goal. And maybe I'm wrong about interpreting, saying, would you make a series, meaning if I had a big business opportunity, I wouldn't be interested. For that reason, I would like to do something, if I had to support my family and stuff, but I would try to make it personal if I could.
Merci.
Well, in truth, I always loved children. I was a camp counselor when I was young. I was I don't know what you call a camp counselor, but I would make plays with 9-year-old kids and 10-year-old kids and boys and girls doing musicals, and I always enjoyed children. So when I was so lucky as to have a nice family and children, when I was going to go away for more than, and my rule was if I go away for more than 2 weeks, I took all the kids out of school and I took along with me. And it was very smart I did that, because usually the 2 weeks turned into 6 months. And I wouldn't have seen my children grow up. I know it was very difficult on their education, because I would just put them in any school. If it was that we were in the Philippines, I put them in a Chinese school, and Sophia was speaking Chinese for a while. But their academic lives were definitely impaired. But on the other hand, they would play with the film crew and the photographer and like the uncle, and Sophia would have her doll's clothes made with the costume department, and Roman would show up as a little boy with a bullet hole in his head because he was hanging out with so we were like a family troupe. And so when we needed a baby in The Godfather for the baptism scene, I happened to have a new baby, and so that was the baby. And when we needed a little boy to recite a French poem, and that was my son. And I always put my films, my children in the films, sort of like if we were a Chinese acrobatic family, we would teach them how to juggle. So that was their funny way of being brought up. But as a result, we have now all of them, Sophia and Roman and Eleanor, all have been around movies as a family. So they learned how you make movies and all about movies. And the academic ultimately catches up, because they're also interested in life, and they didn't really go to college to learn it. They learned the school of movie making on the shows. So clearly that was a decision I made, A, because I was used to working with kids as a drama counselor, and B, because they were the only kids I had when we were in the Apocalypse. When I'm in the scene with Dean Tavaleris, that's because that's all we had to do the part. We didn't have any actors because there was a typhoon and no one could come. So to use the words of Napoleon, use the weapons at hand, except I say use the actors at hand, which is usually your own family.